Good morning to the world. My name is Dairuka, and I have been away for a while. I must say, I have missed making videos, so without any hesitation on my part, I decided to jump back onto the content treadmill, and I couldn't be happier. It has been about 25 days since the release of 1.9, and already the meta has changed about a half a dozen times as they tirelessly tweak treaties, law commitments, and warfare. The AI in certain instances has actually become quite intelligent as a result, but many guides and even hints have become obsolete rather quickly. I actually have a few video shorts that offer quick guides and tips that have been completely made obsolete from the recent nerfs to law commitments. Russia, for instance, can no longer get any bonuses from law commitments since you can only get a plus 5% bonus per rank that you happen to be below the country you're getting the law commitment from. Since Russia is a great power, they get no bonus at all, invalidating the earlier guides. Obviously, I need to update my little tips and tricks as a result. That's why today's video is going to be titled 7 More Tips and Tricks for version 196. Now, before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you, the viewers. Even during my little break on YouTube, subscribers continued to pour in and the views were always piling up. I'd also like to give thanks to my channel's newest premium members, Valen, Erwin Rommel, and Chair. I swear, I will start producing more content for premium members very soon. Now, let's get into the video. I'm starting off with not one, but actually 2 little tips and tricks that just so happen to make use of the same concept. Let's say you want to invade Argentina, but you're a tiny country with only 3 frigates to your name. Clearly, if you were foolish enough to navally invade, they'll be able to push you back with their relatively decent defense since they start off with line infantry. You pretty much need more troops than them. You probably could wait until they go bankrupt and delete their troops, but that is not a guarantee. Do you know what is a guarantee? Navally invading Uruguay instead. You could very easily take the land as a conquered target to give yourself a direct border with Argentina, but you don't have to take the infamy hit if you don't want to. Instead, simply make Uruguay a protectorate and then you can use them to land invasion Argentina without the same penalties of a naval invasion. Yes, in 196 you're limited by the distance now, but you can actually lower distance by colonizing a piece of Africa first and repositioning your army to the headquarters created there. The second part of this trick might actually be even more useful to know. If you happen to be attacking a country that just so happens to have a small protectorate or tributary neighbor who borders them, while also having a shore, you then have a perfect target for naval invasion. The likelihood of them being reinforced by the Overlord's troops is significantly lower than if you tried to navally invade the Overlord themselves. Good examples of perfect targets to make use of this little trick can include Cambodia, who happens to be Dai Nam's weaker tributized neighbor, and Joseon, who are neighbors to Qing. Just note that this doesn't always work, but when it does, it can be an easy way to make landfall. Invasions are messy. Naval invasions in particular come with some very significant disadvantages, such as a limit on troops without penalties based on the number of boats that you have, as well as an actual offensive malice for the attacking troops that doesn't go away until you research landing craft. Thankfully, boat spam wasn't nerfed, but rather it was made infinitely stronger in patch 196. The AI is really good at shuffling around their troops. Unfortunately, this comes at a cost for the AI. By opening up multiple fronts all at once, the AI is far more likely to leave a gap in their defenses that you can take advantage of. Let's say, for instance, you happen to have 40 frigates and 40 line infantry troops, but you're up against maybe 100 irregular infantry troops like you would if you were to invade Japan. You'd be better off making 4 10-boat stacks and 4 10-troop stacks to invade in different regions with. Keep every one of your generals on defensive to prevent any actual fights from taking place until one of your fronts happens to have a large advantage over the enemy. Sometimes they'll cycle their troops around, but they'll often leave gaps in their defenses, and rarely do they ever spread their defenses evenly. Then, once you make landfall and create a front without the need of boats, you can cancel all of your other naval invasions and then delete the armies to bring them to the front lines. Just note that naval invasions like this are also a great way to pull troops from the main front lines. Once more, you don't actually have to fight the enemy. Just put your general in defensive mode and hold their troops on this front line until you make headway on the actual front that you want to win. Even a single troop navally invading can pull away up to 10 troops from the front line this way, and you can hold them there almost indefinitely on defensive mode since they cycle away their offensive advantage far too often. With law commitments no longer being the end-all, be-all method of getting really hard laws passed, thankfully, there are other methods that we can rely on to push through irritating early game laws like tenant farmers without too much difficulty. For most countries, it really is as simple as waiting for the peasant movement to appear, then bolstering them. At that point, you're going to want to try to enact homesteading, and after a couple of days of trying to pass homesteading, you can cancel it completely. Doing this will agitate the peasant movement by quite a lot, and since they're over 25% agitation now, they will put their entire movement's significance in as support for any other laws they happen to love, which includes tenant farmers. If you happen to start as a country that doesn't begin with closed borders, you can even improve this even further by exiling the rural folk leadership and hiring the peasant movement agitator that you created right afterwards. Unfortunately, this little trick does not work for every single law. While most laws do come coupled with movements, a large quantity of those movements will not show up until the mid or even late portions of the game, long after you'll need their assistance to pass the laws in the first place. Still, if you're an unrecognized country, you can always beeline for academia, and by doing so, you can get the awesome modernizer movement, which gives you the ability to pass protectionism, interventionalism, and even laissez-faire. Making use of this trick will give you a nice replacement for the market liberal you'd otherwise struggle to get your hands on. Now, speaking of the modernizing movement, you can actually get it ridiculously early in the game by just going for academia right away. Unfortunately, it is pretty useless in the early game since you would otherwise not have a market liberal in charge, nor will your industrialists be strong enough to allow you to enact any of the modernizers' favorite laws like interventionalism, protectionism, and laissez-faire. Well, maybe not completely useless, because that's where the law commitments are still ultra useful. Obviously, the plus 25% bonus is nice when you're an insignificant, unrecognized country, but it's even more spectacular when you can use it to open up more than one law at a time. If you take a moment to look around, you might discover that there are not many opportunities to grab protectionism from any of the great powers. You'll likely see free trade and mercantilism. Now, don't get me wrong, mercantilism is always an amazing pick to get off of isolationism, but what if you already start with mercantilism? Well, simply grab interventionalism as a law commitment from one of the great powers, then enact it and cancel it a few days later. The modernizers will be agitated and voila, suddenly you have laissez-faire and protectionism opened up. Likewise, you could do this for interventionalism if you're unlucky enough to not get it as a law commitment from the great powers, but instead you manage to get laissez-faire or protectionism. Here's the real treat though. Contravening doesn't have any real major penalties to it, at least none that I've noticed, so even if you cancel trying to pass interventionalism, you can always try again later after the cooldown wears off. By then, you should have easily already passed protectionism, and as such, you pretty much just received 2 hard laws to pass for the price of 1 law commitment. I'm sure you're wondering how the heck you'll even get the interventionalism law commitment in the first place, right? Treaties have become very unwieldy and extremely difficult for new players to navigate, and it's almost impossible to get anything passed without a lot of low percentage risk taking or worse, paying out of pocket. Thankfully, for most countries, there's actually something you can do to get your treaties passed that will not cost you too much in the early game. Offering up investment rights alone will not give you too much of an advantage in creating a treaty, but you can increase the odds by adding company monopolies on your country's less important early game goods in turn. Honestly, who cares if they monopolize your fishing wharves or whaling harbors for the 5 years that it'll take for the treaty to expire? Just don't be foolish and give up a monopoly on vital goods like lumber, iron, or coal if you happen to be using any of the 3 in your construction sector cycle. If you want to play strategically, you can actually pinpoint the goods that each company will want early on and go off to conquer a region of the world that has the resources you need if your country doesn't already start with them. Most people shy away from giving investment rights and monopolies in the early game specifically because it can greatly hamper your growth. Not only do they sap your building profits away for themselves, but in the case of companies putting regional headquarters on your country, they can fritter away your investment pool for their own gains. Yet in the early game, for the mass majority of small unrecognized countries, this is not even a gamble. They will not waste their time on you, especially if you haven't got any construction sectors built yet. Don't forget, you can nationalize anyways, plus, even if they do put a headquarters on your land, if it's a powerful company that builds iron for you, you'll get a huge discount on its creation since it's built by a company and only 30% of the profit is actually leaving. Believe it or not, this can actually be a great way to industrialize fast for backwards countries with huge amounts of peasants like Dainam, Japan, Qing, and even Russia. Not to mention, if you monopolize goods, you can prevent certain regional headquarters from building in your land anyways, so don't be afraid to give away investment rights from time to time to get your ultra important treaties done. Recognition is a whole different beast nowadays, but thankfully, Paradox seems to have learned their lesson and has made it far, far easier than before. Before, getting recognition required you to perform one of two cheese methods, such as invading Russia to release their Siberian holdings or invading the Ottomans to release Iraq. The more recent method was spamming embassy treaties all over the world just to get enough recognition to bypass the penalties you'd have otherwise. To be honest, none of that is really needed anymore, as merely modernizing your country will pretty much guarantee that you'll be able to get recognized with ease. Now, to me, by far, the fastest and easiest way to get recognized now includes growing your GDP high enough to push yourself into the top 10 of GDP. Yet, the second easiest one will always be going for voting laws, of which it suddenly makes wealth voting even more enticing than its oligarchy brethren. Then the third easiest way is getting your literacy higher than 40%, which is a far cry easier to do than, say, dealing with having a high GDP per capita or high average standard of living. Of course, you can still make use of embassies the same way as before, just remember that it'll be a lot harder to get the treaties passed. Make sure to strategically give away investment rights and monopolies for short 5-year treaties to get a guaranteed 60 embassy points per treaty. Regardless of how you proceed, basic economic modernization is still the best way forward to get rid of the serfdom, traditionalism, and isolationism malices. It has gotten so much better that even having slavery will not ruin your chances of getting recognition now. With a lot of early game strategies revolving around drawing in other countries to help you conquer large chunks of land being patched out, it can be really difficult to find ways to expand easily without a huge amount of risk or growth involved. Great Britain having no interest in helping others against Qing has been a particularly big loss for a lot of countries such as Japan, Joseon, and Dainam, yet that is no real reason to give up hope. Qing, as we know, is a paper tiger in the first 20 years of the game thanks to their huge combat penalties, and even if you don't have an immediate land border to invade them from, if you happen to have line infantry or better, you'll likely be able to squash them even if you have only 1/10 of their troops. But what if you're stuck on a regular infantry? Well, you could always just beeline for line infantry and hurt Qing then, although you might not be able to get off a second war before Qing loses the addiction debuff when you go this route. So what is an aspiring conqueror to do? Well, simply attack Sulu. If you have even a single boat, you can conquer either the entire country or force them to back down on North Borneo. Then, use the new conquest to make a border with Brunei, whom you should also conquer. And, if you can, grab Sintang and Balungan as well. Now, why would this help you when your intended goal is to attack Qing, while Borneo is an island that is not in any way, shape, or form attached to Qing? In this case, if you attack Lanfang, you have the opportunity to pull in the Dutch East Indies into your war. Granted, the Dutch East Indies likely aren't very fond of you since you took the land that they themselves want to conquer. However, because they want that land really, really badly, you can actually trade it to them in return for them joining your war against Qing. While they aren't nearly as strong as Britain is, believe it or not, the Dutch East Indies can actually beat Qing by themselves, even without a direct border. Of course, you can guarantee the war goes your way by throwing your own troops in to help. Other easy targets that have land that more powerful countries will want will include Tuscany, Dahomey, Gaza, Macron, and Uruguay. I would like to thank everybody who has watched this far into the video. I am absolutely blown away at the success of the earlier tips and tricks video that was released, reaching nearly 50,000 views. I can only hope that this one will do that well too. If you're new to the channel, I typically do playthroughs and guides, so if you're into concise guides, take some time to watch my video on which voting laws are worth picking in patch 1.9. Anyhow, that's it for me. Life comes at you fast, so please be good to each other and make sure to give your loved ones an extra big hug tonight. Beyond that, always remember, Hail Hydra Cat.